Hello and welcome to the Ghoul Guide Association, the show where we talk all about things Gothic and pop culture. We are, of course, your Ghoul Guides. I am Lauren.
And I'm Mary.
And in this episode, we are going to be doing a hot off the press review for a film that I'm sure many of you who have either already seen or are planning on watching, Guillermo del Toro's adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Yes, this is one that ever since he announced that he was doing it, I know that you and I, the whole coven, have been so excited for this.
Excited.
Obviously, Del Toro is a master filmmaker, and we really particularly like him because he's so Gothic and he understands Gothic. So if you've seen Crimson Peak, for example, I think this is a film, and I know because we've talked about it so much. We both agree this film was missold as a horror film. Like, it is a horror film, don't get me wrong. It is about ghosts, but it's not your kind of traditional like horror film. And
it's specifically a Gothic horror.
Yeah, it's a Gothic horror, and there's so many interviews where he talks about wanting to pay homage to Gothic novelists like Anne Radcliffe, and I think it really comes across. You know, if you look at his older films as well, Pan's Labyrinth and his earlier works, you can see that love there. And also, just one thing that is so brilliant about him, about Del Toro, is his love for kind of the practicalities of it. So it's not that he doesn't use CGI, but that he uses it in tandem with other effects. So films like Pan's Labyrinth or Crimson Peak, Shape of Water, and now his Frankenstein, you really do get a sense of the kind of physical creation of these monsters, especially, as well as just the beautiful, gorgeous sets. So this is all just to say that Frankenstein is obviously one of our favourite texts. If you want to hear us talk about the novel, then go to the Rosenbach's YouTube page and listen to us on Sundays with Frankenstein. We will talk all about the novel there. But essentially, this film, which is what we will be reviewing today, is something that we've been so excited for, because I think also when it comes to Frankenstein adaptations, I think there are good Frankenstein films. There are iconic Frankenstein films, and I'm thinking especially of the Universal Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, early kind of horror classics. But has there been a good Frankenstein adaptation? I think that is a question that you and I, are like, So by the end of this review, hopefully you will get our opinion and our thoughts as to whether that has finally been achieved or not.
I suspect that if you are listening or watching this, you may have actually come to us from Sundays with Frankenstein. I know from our analytics that a lot of our listeners and viewers are in the US. So I do think we probably have the Rosenbach to thank for that. So you probably have heard us talk a little bit about this before, but we both have that kind of, we don't have an issue with the way that Frankenstein has become a cultural phenomenon. And I'm not Frankenstein is not the name of the monster person. It does annoy me sometimes when people misuse it in other things, but Frankenstein has taken on its own cultural identity in the same way that Dracula has. And I love that, but it has always gnawed at me, as with something like Carmilla, and to be fair, even Dracula, that there's no really good adaptation. The only adaptation I would say up until now of Frankenstein that I've really liked is the Johnny Lee Miller, Benedict Cumberbatch stage adaptation, which I think it was available for a while during COVID for free on YouTube. I'm not sure, but it's a National Theatre one, and it's fantastic. It's probably my favourite adaptation, like, if you'd have asked me before you've seen this film, and I'm still thinking about it, but I think it's just always been something that film and TV has really struggled with. And I think part of that is because Frankenstein the novel and Frankenstein the universal horror tradition, two very, very different things. And I think, unlike Dracula, where actually, as much as I love Dracula, it's kind of boring in some places and it's not always overly well written and it's quite misogynistic, Frankenstein is incredibly well written. And I personally think it's very well paced. Like, I love Mary Shelley, she's one of my favourite writers, but it is a Gothic romance. There are scenes of the sublime, there's a lot of introspection. And I think if you're expecting a horror, that's not what Frankenstein is. There's horror to it, and I would say that it does count to me as a Gothic horror, but it's much more a Gothic romance than it is a Gothic horror. And I think that has complicated adaptations because you kind of potentially gonna disappoint an audience if you do a faithful adaptation of Frankenstein.
I think one adaptation, one film adaptation that I've seen that really does kind of get parts of like the point of the novel is a film called Depraved, which I don't know if you've seen it, but it's by
No.
Larry Fessenden. And
Oh, okay.
my partner Craig showed it to me quite recently, actually. And having watched Del Toro's Frankenstein, I think he's definitely kind of drawing on some things from there in the look of the creature, but also the idea of it's a kind of scientific experiment that's
Yeah.
using the body parts of soldiers, which I know we will get into like in a bit, but that idea of, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where does this new creation start in terms of identity and the parts of his body, the parts that his body is made of, like where does that
Mm-hmm.
end? That's also in Depraved, and that relationship between the creator and the creature in terms of responsibility. I think that is in Depraved, but I think it's also very much a kind of modern reimagining, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what Del Toro does is it is an adaptation
It's
of
an
the novel
adaptation.
in a more kind of like traditional sense of that
Mm-hmm.
word. Um,
Yeah, and it does. So I've worked a little bit on adaptation. I know you have too. More for Jane Austen, but when I was studying like the theory of adaptation, one of the things that I really realized about myself as a viewer and as a scholar is that I don't mind when adaptations change things. I actually don't have an issue with that. What I have an issue with is when the changes don't make sense or when the changes don't bring any added value. And I think so. Just a quick, a quick thing. We'll try not to drop too many spoilers, but if you're going to see Frankenstein, you probably know what happens. But
yeah, yeah.
Del Toro does make some changes from the novel, and I have seen some discourse, go back and forth on this. He places it slightly later than Shelley's novel, so it's more Victorian than it is sort of late Georgian Regency. Frankenstein himself, Victor, is older. He isn't this, university student fuckwit, which I go back and forth on. We'll talk about it. William, the younger brother, is not a child. Elizabeth is not the ward of the family. So there are changes, there are differences, there's an added character, but it's an adaptation and it does what adaptation should do. Frankenstein isn't as long as Dracula, but it's still a long novel. It's not a short story, it's not a novella. It would have been very difficult, I think, to get all of the things that make the story of Frankenstein make sense into a film. And just off the top, I think adaptation wise, the decisions that Del Toro makes work for the medium that the story is being told in. It works for a film. It's a long film. It's not a super, super long film. We're not talking Napoleon, but it is still a long film. And even then, you wouldn't have been able to get all of those aspects in. So I will say it is very much an adaptation. You cannot do a faithful adaptation of almost any novel without missing some things out of it. And I think that is a decision that Del Toro makes. And I'll kick us off. I quite liked a lot of the things he did, despite them being very, very different from the novel. I felt like a lot of the decisions that Del Toro made with the adaptation were in the spirit of Mary Shelley, and you could tell that this is someone who has really read this book and has also done research around it. And things like aging up William and slightly changing things about the relationship within the family, yes, it does slightly change the narrative in terms of like parenthood and fathers and mothers, but it kept the essence of Frankenstein, and it managed to show you very easily on screen who Victor Frankenstein is and why he's a complete fucking moron.
100%. Like, I think so. We had the privilege, and I really would say this, of like going to see it in the cinema. So if you are able to, I would absolutely recommend that you go and see this in a cinema. It is well worth it. If you are unable to, then it's on Netflix now. So, whatever way that you can, go and watch it. But you and I, immediately, we came out and we were both like, that was amazing. And that was like the best adaptation of the novel that we've seen. I think, I don't want to linger on this too much, but my issue with Kenneth Branagh's adaptation of the novel is that it does exactly what
Kenneth Branagh.
No, but it does exactly what you don't want an adaptation to do, which is it's trying to like almost like follow point by point by point all of the bits in the novel. But then it kind of, for me, it misses the main point, which is that Victor is the villain because he is not only playing God, but he is being a bad father and a bad parent. And I think, there's been so much discourse around this film, especially some people criticizing it for being too like much of a men thing, like, and I'm like, but that is kind of the point, because Mary Shelley was dealing with her issues with her own father, who went into a spiral when Mary Shelley was born, and then her mother, Mary Godwin, died. But then also she was dealing with issues,
trying to turn her into a version of her mother, which was really fucking creepy.
But also, not only was Mary Shelley so young when she wrote this novel, but she was also grieving because she had a child that had died. And Percy Shelley at this point just could not give a fuck. Like, he's out there saying, we'll just have another one, and just not caring about her at all. And so I think one of the themes of this story that Del Toro captures is that idea of when you create something, you are also bound by a responsibility to it. And I did read something that I thought was really interesting, in the way that he adapts it from the novel. Because in the novel, Victor, when he sees his creation alive, he is horrified by the grotesqueness of the physicality of the creature, what he interprets as monstrosity. You don't get that in this film, but what happens is that Victor is horrified by having to be responsible for this creature, and it's that idea of the responsibility that makes him lean into that abandonment, which I read that and I was like, yes, exactly, that is so what is happening here.
And I actually, like, if you'd have told me before I saw it, I think I'd have gone, oh, because so much of what Frankenstein is about the idea of motherhood. But actually, one of the things, so I've talked about Frankenstein quite a lot in terms of like the patriarchal aspects and the masculinity in Frankenstein. One of the things that it actually made me think and made me realize, and this is the beauty of a good adaptation, that someone like us who has studied this book to high heaven, spent weeks talking about it on a show, have written about it scholarly, and I sat there and thought, fuck, I've never thought about that before. That one of the things that Frankenstein is about, which is a really popular thing in the Gothic novel, but almost always about women, is shit fathers. Like, one of the things that Frankenstein is doing is showcasing that men want to create life, but they don't want to be responsible for it. And I actually think this is a really pertinent and prescient conversation right now. There's a lot of discourse happening online about men wanting children, but not wanting to be an active parent, that
Yeah.
men can be rock stars and be parents because they're not the primary caregiver. Women cannot be rock stars and good parents because the
Yeah.
two things don't allow you to be both.
You want
And I
you want a
actually,
trad wife, but can you afford
yes,
it? Um,
exactly. And I actually really loved that Del Toro highlighted something new about the novel because it could have been a bit tired. The motherhood thing is still there. Victor is obsessed with his mother in the same way he is in the novel. And we'll talk about the Mia Goth of it all in a second because we both missed something. Victor is obsessed with his mother, but I think shifting the relationship between Victor and his father and demonstrating this patriarchal urge to shape your progeny in your own image, but then resenting them for it and resenting the fact that you have to do it. The abuse that Victor places upon the creature really shifted. It's still the same, but it helped me to see something new. And I actually was like, oh, I love that. I
so
love what this is saying about fatherhood.
so on that point, and I think again, like this is just another way of like really translating the text into a new medium that like you've just made me think of right now. One of my bugbears about Victor as a character, I mean, I love the book and I think that it's great, but Victor annoys me. And one of the reasons I find him so annoying is that the reason that the creature is so big is because Victor is so lazy. He and
Mm-hmm.
you do get that in this adaptation, you know, we'll make it bigger because then it'll be easier to do the
Yeah.
veins and all of the
Yeah.
intricate kind of physical human systems and stuff. And you get that kind of laziness and wanting to find a shortcut in
Mm-hmm.
the way that he approaches
Mm-hmm.
being a responsible
Yeah.
parent figure to this creature. He gets frustrated with the creature who is, you know, alive essentially for the first time in this physical manifestation.
He's
So
literally living his
this
first life.
yeah, and Victor does not approach him as a child.
Mm-hmm.
He expects him to develop language like instantly,
Mm-hmm.
and then get, you know, and he is frustrated with it and doesn't think, well, let me think about how I can help this being that I've created
Mm-hmm.
to learn speech and
Mm-hmm.
to gain a vocabulary and to do these
Yeah.
things. There's an expectation that he should already be able to do this because it's
Yeah.
that whole idea of like,
Yeah.
you know, fatherhood and absent fathers, which is I think what a lot of what the book is about, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
And someone, you know,
Which, if
yeah.
you think about Shelley's complex feelings about education, Godwin put a lot of expectation onto Shelley when she was a young girl, and she felt immense pressure to be old before her time. But then when she was 16 and acting like an adult, was punished for it. And I thought, you know, there is a real aspect of, particularly when the creature has his like romantic education, you get a lot of Shelley's own complicated feelings about
Mm.
this education her father's given her, where she's grateful for the brilliance, but she's resentful for not being allowed to be a child and things like that. And that really came through in this film.
there is
Really, really
there
came through.
there's such a touching scene where Victor leans forward to listen to the creature's heartbeat, and the creature interprets that as a form
Affection.
affection, and the creature essentially hugs Victor back, but
Yeah,
actually it's not, because Victor wasn't hugging him. He was just checking to see that
yeah,
his creation works. And
yeah.
there's another bit where he's like, oh my gosh, look at the sun, isn't it amazing? And the interpretation of the creature being like, this is my father calling me his son,
Yeah.
and that kind of that misinterpretation that continually happens because Victor doesn't take the time to learn how
Mm-hmm.
to communicate and
Yeah.
understand and also offer compassion and care and
Yeah.
love and affection.
Yeah. One thing, before we kind of move on to the, you know, the thing we both liked about it, because we both have a slightly separate, like for me, there was one thing, for Mary, there's something slightly different. But one of the things I really loved about this film was the creature.
Yeah,
I,
absolutely.
Jacob Elordi, I will put my hands up and say I was really dubious about this casting because I had not really seen him in much. I only really knew him as a bit of a teen heartthrob. And I really like Andrew Garfield. So I was really sad when Andrew Garfield had to leave. the creature is so beautiful but so monstrous, exactly how I imagine him to be. Elordi has the physicality, but the face and the emotion that he portrays. I I think I did nearly cry at least 2 points in this film, because the emotion that the creature conveys is so palpable. And so I think, especially if you have read the book, you know the extra detail, and it really moved me. I know some people were a little bit disappointed in the appearance of the creature, but he is huge. He, like, we know in the novel, Victor picks these parts, and this bigness and this grotesqueness and the lumbering of it all. I thought it did capture that, but it managed to do something new whilst also offering me something that felt familiar and correct. And I just really felt that the creature, the way the creature moved, the way the creature like showed physical bodily emotions, there's something so terrifying but also sad. And this is, characters like Claudia in the Interview with the Vampire, of watching a big, huge, ostensibly adult figure that is monstrous and terrible, but is also so innocent and childlike. And when Elizabeth says, like, this is a creature free of original sin, that line captured so much of the nuance of Shelley's text. And there were lots of bits in the film, actually, where one of the bits with Victor and then the bit with the blind man, both I felt the creature's pain, and it did genuinely nearly make me cry. It was, and I didn't think that would necessarily be possible. But again, another testament to the use of prosthetics rather than CGI.
And
The creature is brilliant.
yeah, hats off to Jacob Elordi, because I think he
Amazing.
sat for 10 hours to get into his prosthetics, and a lot of them are like individually applied pieces all
Mm-hmm.
over his head and his body. So sitting for, he would get up so much earlier than most of the other cast,
Mm-hmm.
and then he would go and deliver that kind of performance, and it is just it's so beautiful and poignant. He's
Mm-hmm.
so you know he's just so at times naive, but then
Yeah.
childlike, and then just I see, I can't even find the words, but you have described it like brilliantly. I think you really just
Yeah.
capture the movement, the
Mm-hmm.
and also the moments of anger. So
Yeah.
there's one bit where Victor is saying to him, just say one word. Just say one word, and I won't do something. And I won't say what Victor does, and I won't say what the word is. But the creature then, and it's quite spiteful, but
Mm-hmm.
it's spiteful in I think a really powerful way. He says another
Mm-hmm.
word, and that angers Victor, because Victor is a selfish
Well, it's because it's not
person. And then
the
yeah,
creature
and then
knows that word won't save him.
yes, and it
Like,
doesn't. And Victor
yeah,
goes and does something like
yeah.
Victor always does, which is really ridiculous. But yeah, and
Well,
then
maybe.
the monstrosity of the creature. There is
Mm-hmm.
another line that I think, again, like Jacob Elordi delivers so powerfully, where he says, like, you only listen when I hurt you. And it's like,
Yes.
this is learned behavior that is also showing like those cycles of abuse,
Yeah.
that Victor has instilled in his
Mm-hmm.
creation. And yeah,
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 absolutely. Yeah. So, what did we think of Victor?
I loved it. I loved it. I thought
Same.
Oscar Isaac was brilliant. I know Del Toro has said, because I think Oscar Isaac, when he got cast, he was like, "Why am I being cast? Because aren't I too old?" And Del Toro was like, "Well, this is my version, and it's
Mm-hmm.
also my Mexican version, so I
Mm-hmm.
want I want you."
I
So yeah.
love Oscar Isaacs. Like, I love, 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 love him. I know it's not a hot take. He's a well-liked man. I was so excited when he got cast in Star Wars. I think he's so charming. And when Del Toro talked about this idea of wanting Victor to be a rock star, because at first
Mm,
I was also a bit like, Victor is this pallid, useless sap of a man. Like, and he's 20 and he's shit. But actually, the fatherhood like, it
mm,
worked with having Elordi as the monster. And actually, Isaacs is one of the few people that has that charisma where he can play unlikable, but you understand why this is happening.
Yeah.
His Victor is a lovely blend of the 1818 Victor and the 1831 Victor, of the imagined Victor, like of someone who is like, but I'm brilliant. Like, I'm
Yeah.
brilliant. Why don't you see that? And I really loved how they showed him as being kind of like performative in his disinterest in his appearance. Like,
Yeah.
it's, you know, Victor is like, well, I'm not wearing a suit and I'm not doing this, but like he's always like baronically hot. And I also think, again, like, we, as much as I fucking hate Byron as a human being, we cannot forget how important he is as a figure in the creation of that novel. Like,
Yeah.
Shelley is literally looking at Byron and being like, I'm a fucking right about you,
Well, I
you
think
fuck
this
boy.
is, yeah, I think this is why if anyone says, you know, Victor is based on X person, no, Victor is an amalgamation of various people in Mary
Mm-hmm,
Shelley's life. And I think that, yeah, there are aspects of all of these, especially
mm-hmm,
men
mm-hmm.
in her life, that she's woven into this character. But yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Before we move to our final thoughts, let's just quickly talk about Elizabeth. So your thoughts?
I said this to you, didn't I, at the end? So Elizabeth has my favourite line in the whole film.
Mm.
And I genuinely was like, "Oh, is Guillermo del Toro reading my research?" Because Elizabeth gives this line about war and the destructiveness of war. And I was like, oh my God, this is everything I have been saying. If you listen to Sundays with Frankenstein, you will know I banged on about Frankenstein being a post war novel and being the beginning of Shelley's anti war narrative that goes right through to the end of her publishing career. And he manages to sum up Shelley and her anti war stance in this like one line from Elizabeth. He then follows it up with this idea of war fueling the creation of the creature, which I won't go into too much because it is a bit of a spoiler. But Elizabeth had some of my favorite lines. She had some fantastic costumes. She was probably my favorite version I've seen of Elizabeth on screen. Mia Goth, I don't think, is a very good actress. And unfortunately, next to Jacob Elordi and Oscar Isaacs, she just didn't hold up. And it was a shame because, and I know some people really like Mia Goth, and I've seen people praising Elizabeth. I think I loved Elizabeth as a character. I loved Guillermo del Toro's Elizabeth. I loved Elizabeth's costuming. I loved her dialogue. I thought it was the best version of Elizabeth I've seen. I felt it did justice for Elizabeth. I just don't think she was very good in the role. And that's a shame. It's
And that
probably my
is,
least favorite thing about the film.
yeah, and I think that is just, I mean, again, like these are our opinions, and a lot of stuff does come
Yes.
down to taste. So if you are someone who thinks that Mia Goth was amazing in that role, then great. Like, we liked lots of things about this film, and you know, if that's one thing that you liked, that's amazing. What I will
Mm-hmm.
say, going into the film, I knew that Mia Goth played two characters, and
I did not.
when the first character came on, I was like, right, this is Mia Goth. For me, there was so much prosthetics that they put on Mia Goth that I basically convinced myself that that was not Mia Goth. And I was like, oh,
Well,
okay, maybe I misremembered. And then I just deleted that from my mind. And then you sent me a message being like, oh my God, did you know this other character was also Mia Goth? And I was like, do you know what I did? But like,
I
so
was literally like, what the fuck?
I think
I did
that
not know. I did not know.
yeah, and I
You
don't want this to
defeated the
be,
point.
yeah, I don't want this to be a spoiler, but yeah, there is the reason that you cast someone in those two roles, I think, is slightly undone by the fact that there was so much
Mm-hmm.
prosthetic that it made her unrecognizable.
Yeah, I
But
genuinely didn't know it was her.
that's all I will say on that. And okay, so Lauren, we're closing out on 30 minutes, so I think
Mm-hmm. Final thoughts.
final thoughts about Del Toro's
I loved it.
Frankenstein.
I loved it. I thought that aesthetically it was beautiful. I adored the costuming. I love that Del Toro, and this is what I mean about adaptation. he captures the essence of something without being strictly tied to the time period. I loved the adaptation choices that it made. I thought the relationship with William was really, really well done. It gave William agency as a character that he doesn't necessarily have in the novel because he's such a small child. One of the things that I really, really liked was the just the little details. I said to you when we came out, the voltaic batteries, for example. Last year I went to Milan and I went to the Temple of Volta, which is essentially a museum that is a temple that is all about it's actually on Lake Como, but that is all about Volta and his invention of the battery. Shelley was hugely inspired by him. She actually went to visit the area. It was after she wrote Frankenstein, but we know that she put so much time and research and effort into her literary works. So there were just lots of things that I think you can tell how much Del Toro loves this, and that then translates out to the viewer. But I think particularly in the way that it talks about war and the way it talks about masculinity, not just because they're two of my research points, that's two things I find so interesting. And I think often because Shelley's a woman and a woman writer, we tend to focus on the the fact that in playing God, Victor's trying to be a mother, but in trying to create life, he also is a shit father. And I felt it was really powerful. It's visually beautiful. And it added something to the novel for me. And I didn't think that was possible at this point in time. And I will be watching it again on Netflix. And I think, like Crimson Peak, this is going to be a film I go back to again and again and again, because like Del Toro, I just love this novel and I love the Gothic. And this is a beautiful example of someone who loves the genre and loves his craft. It's just a beautiful film. I understand why people have certain issues with it. I actually didn't have a problem with the Byron quote at the end, because Byron actually is an important part of this story, well, despite me maybe being loath to admit it. I think it did Shelley justice, and I will definitely be going back to it.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with all of that. I think for me, it's such a beautiful adaptation that really, like you say, captures what I think is the kind of true essence of the novel, if you want to put it in that way, but also really showcases Del Toro's passion and love for this text, and also for this genre of the genre of monsters. And in terms of like my research, one of the reasons why I love this novel is because it is all about monsters and creation and that the role of responsibility in society. And I think that this adaptation really does add stuff to that. And also, just because, we've mentioned quite a lot of Del Toro stuff, I also just want to shout out his Pinocchio adaptation. Again, it's such a beautiful, brilliant, just film that really showcases Del Toro's love. And again, if you've seen any of his work, it's so brilliant and so gorgeous and so well made that yes, I will be adding this into my rewatch pile.
One thing that I should say that I haven't said is that an adaptation should invite a new audience in. And I think that this is one of those rare occasions that you don't need to have read the book to find this film good. I actually think that, and it makes me happy to think that there will be a new generation. And then, God, does this make me sound corny? It makes me happy to think there's going to be a new generation that will watch this film and will come to Mary Shelley because of it. Like, whilst to me, it's like, oh my God, Mary Shelley is one of the most famous writers of all time. She's still a kind of minor figure in the canon when we think about it. There's a reason we put so much work into a project like Gothic Women, and it does make me really happy to think that a film like this, that is so beautiful, so brilliant, such an act of love, and also so well researched, that really wants to convey the message, will bring a new audience in. Like, that makes me really happy. And also, there's a scene where Oscar Isaacs is in the bath.
Yes.
So
I always make a note when I watch
cinema ticket.
I always make a note when I watch films, you know, whether it's a woman in a shower scene, you know, just for sex and nudity, or whether in this case we have a little bit of, you know, role reversal
Yeah.
and male kind of bath, shower nudity. And yeah, this
Yeah.
film delivers. And on that
Yeah.
note, please share with us your thoughts. Have you seen the
Yeah.
film? What did you think of it? Did you like it as an adaptation, as a film? Tell us your thoughts and comment. We love hearing from you. And
We
in
do.
the meantime, stay safe and stay spooky.
Stay safe and stay spooky, everybody.